Hi, welcome to Knexions. Thanks so much for joining us this week. Couple quick reminders for parents. Our children's ministry continues on Sunday mornings at 9:30 with Pastor Kyle and Commander Spaceman. You can join that via Zoom. As well for youth, we have in-person youth happening every Friday night with Pastor Aaron, so you can get in contact with him for more details about when and where. Thanks for joining us again, and I'll pass it on to the worship team.
Nothing can separate. Even if I ran away, your love never fails. I know I still make mistakes. You have new mercies for me every day. Your love never fails. I know that you love me. Your love never fails. The wind is strong and the water's deep. I'm not alone on these open seas. Your love never fails. Chasms far too wide. I never thought I'd reach the other side. Your love never fails. Stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the ocean rages, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. You make all things work together for my good. Will you stay the same through the ages? Your love never joy comes in the morning. And when the ocean breaks, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. You stay the same through the ages. Your love never changes. There may be pain in the night, but joy comes in the morning. And when the ocean rages, I don't have to be afraid, because I know that you love me. Your love never fails.
When my hope and strength is gone, you're the one who calls me on. You are the life, you are the fight that's in my soul. Oh, your resurrection power burns like fire in my heart. When waters rise, I lift my eyes up to your throne. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You are the power in my veins, oh Lord. My God, my conqueror. I will sing into the night. Christ is risen and on high. Greater is He living in me than in the world. No surrender, no retreat. We are free and we're redeemed. We will declare over despair, you are our hope. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You are the power in our veins, oh Lord. Our God, our conqueror. Nothing is impossible. Every chain is breakable with you. We are victorious. You are stronger than our hearts. You are greater than the dark of you. We are victorious. We are more than conquerors through Christ. You have overcome this world, this life. We will not bow to sin or to shame. We are defiant in your name. You are the fire that cannot be tamed. You spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. You have been so kind to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. I was your foe, still your love fought for me. You have been so good to me. When I felt no worth, you paid it all for me. You have been so good to me. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Oh, it chases me down, fights till I'm found, leaves the 99. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, still you give yourself away. Oh, the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. Shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me. Wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Shadow won't light up, mountain won't climb up, coming after me. Wall you won't kick down, lie you won't tear down, coming after me. Shadow till I found peace tonight. I couldn't earn it, I don't deserve it, till you give yourself away. Overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love. Overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Jason. I'm one of the pastors here at Knexions Church. And I hope you've been enjoying our series, Find Your Fit. I also hope that you've been discovering what your fit is, what pathway helps you connect, even enhances your connection with Jesus. Because this is our desire. We want to be a thriving and growing community. We want to be a community of Jesus' disciples. And becoming disciple means becoming Christ-like. Now, in order to do that, we need to be with Jesus. We need to become like Jesus, and we need to do what Jesus did. So we want to become like Jesus. That means we need to let him influence us. And we're influenced when we spend time with him. You know, it's sort of like Courtney and I will often joke how much we influence each other. Courtney loves coffee. I, in the past, have not always been the biggest fan. But over the last little while, I kind of started smelling it, every day. It was a good smell. Finally, I bit the bullet and I just said, okay, I'm going to try this coffee that she's liking so much. And I just started really liking and enjoying coffee in a way I've never had before. I even already have a favorite brand. Now, she is considering this a huge conquest. A huge conquest. Because usually I'm the one who's influencing her. And she is doing victory laps. It's annoying. She's rubbing it in. Well, the truth is that it's just like that. If we want to become like Jesus, we need to be influenced by him. We are influenced by him when we spend time and we connect with him. Much like I was influenced by Courtney and I tried coffee again and I liked it. So yes, we need to read our Bibles to be influenced by Jesus. We need to be praying, but we also need to find our pathway. Find our fit, some way that really helps make that connection, even enhances that connection. Because we want Jesus to be allowed to influence our lives. So, we've been using the book Sacred Pathways by Gary Thomas as a guide. We've already explored the naturalist, the traditionalist, the aesthetic, the activist, caregiver, enthusiast, and contemplative. Now we're going to just briefly explore the sensate and the intellectuals. So, what is a sensate? Now, and I'm saying sensate, not sensei. My son hears sensei. I'm saying sensate. Sensei, martial arts instructor. Sensate, 5 senses. Sensei, Mr. Miyagi, Master Splinter. Chuck Norris. Sensate, your 5 senses: sight, touch, taste, smell, sound. Now this one can be a little bit different, so let me explain. Now, we interact with this world with our 5 senses. We see it and we can hear it, and we can touch and taste and smell. And it is basically the idea of how we experience the world. And that's kind of the phrase with the sensates. It's let me experience. A great example I can think of with the idea of senses basically enhancing or bringing an experience, it's Disneyland. Think about it. Maybe you've not been there. You enter the gates. You enter the park. You see Mickey Mouse, the flower, made of flowers. Just a little bit of a hill, and there's the train station. If you go to the right or you go to the left, you're going to go in a little bit of a tunnel. And when you go through the tunnel, you find yourself in Main Street Disneyland. You don't see the gates anymore. You don't see the buses that dropped you off. You don't see the parkade. You don't see the city of Anaheim. See, by limiting sight lines away from those things and making you focus, the sounds, the music, the characters, it brings you into the moment. And that's what happens in there. Even when you're walking down and you're seeing all the sights and the shops, the castle in the background, you go to a different part of the park and you don't see that. It even limits your eye lines in different parts of the park. Like if you're in Batuu, which is the Star Wars part of the park, you don't see Main Street Disney. You don't see the characters. You don't see Fantasyland. You see the Star Wars characters and some of the smells and some of the sounds. And it gets you into that experience, that moment. Well, the sensates, they want to experience. And they want one or more of their senses stimulated. We could probably understand the idea of our senses being stimulated. Think about the music used in movies. It's a combination of visual, then the score of the music that really brings us into the moment, whether it's sad, scary, intense, whatever it might be. We become stimulated and it becomes so real. We can sometimes feel the intensity, even though it's really not going to affect us at all. So those of us who are drawn to museums and concerts, those who really appreciate art or the expression of art, maybe even artists themselves, can find themselves quite often enjoying and connecting through this pathway. See, the thing is, art itself is much more than something that needs to be admired. There's often a message behind it the artist wants you to really interact with, to be drawn into. Ultimately, when it comes to God and Jesus, the sensate wants to experience, but an experience that leads to beauty and leaves you in a sense of awe. One of the moments where I started to understand a little bit more of this pathway was thinking about one of my professors in school, definitely a sensate. And when I think of how we talked about worship and how we talked about things like that, the words beauty and awe were used so much. He would use it, it was amazing as he's describing things in the Bible, as he's describing different worship history and all that. So often he would use the word awe. And so I really kind of started to understand a lot of this because of that. So let's take a quick look at the Bible. There's lots of sensory interaction. Leviticus 3:16 speaks about sacrifices, and it says the priest will burn them on the altar, and it's a special gift of food, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. You go on to Psalms 119:103. How sweet your words taste to me. They are sweeter than honey. This allows for a marker of experience. Instantly, the writer, the reader, they have a concept of the experience of God's words and the beauty and the awe that they're sweet as honey, or sweeter than honey. Then there's the offering of incense. Psalms 141 verse 2. Accept my prayer as incense offered to you, and my upraised hands an evening offering. See, basically the idea of associating our prayers to God to a beautiful smell. Psalm 34:8. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Oh, the joys of those who take refuge in him. I mean, that's about experience. Taste and see. Experience God. And then there's a lot to do with sound. There's make a joyful noise. Praise him on the cymbal. There's even times when we're supposed to praise them using an instrumentations. Just different noises. We can even go to the New Testament, and Paul would write this in Ephesians. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Again, it gives us that idea of just how much and beautiful Jesus dying on the cross was and how God sees it. It's a pleasing aroma. The tabernacle. I mean, it's a beautiful design meant to stimulate the senses. I mean, in Exodus 31, I mean, a man named Bezalel is empowered by God to build the tabernacle, to furnish the tabernacle, to artisan all of the, just around, and all of it's a point to the nature and beauty of God. And if you do some studies on that, it'll show you not only how it points to God, but how it points to Christ. And basically the idea is when they're in the tabernacle, they would just be in awe. I'm recalling my professor right now. They would be in awe. He was far more flamboyant in how he presented himself than I am. But he would just be in awe. Use that word too much. Anyway, Gary Thomas writes this about Ezekiel, another stimulation of the senses. This is what he writes. He feels a wind. He sees flashing lightning surrounded by brilliant light, fantastic creatures, and a magnificent and stunning throne of sapphire. It's in Ezekiel 1 verse 4, 5 to 14, and 26 to 27. He hears the sound of wings like a roar of rushing waters and a loud rumbling. In chapter 1, verse 24, chapter 3, verse 12 to 13. Ezekiel is then asked to eat a scroll that tastes sweet. In chapter 3, verse 1 to 3. And after it's all over, Ezekiel is so overwhelmed, perhaps by the five senses, and the onslaught is so great, he sits down, stunned, for 7 days. That's chapter 3, verse 15. I mean, these are sensory experiences found throughout the Bible. Also through church history. Again, I'm coming back to that professor of mine who I really believe was a sensate. I was so surprised when I looked at my courses, and one of my courses on basically the history and understanding of worship was architecture. That surprised me. That was a whole course on architecture. And yeah, you know what? We learned about the tabernacle and the temple. But we also learned about the churches that were built hundreds and hundreds of years ago in Europe, Spain, and basically how their whole architecture, the whole layout was about a sensory stimulation. Often churches were built like a cross. There would be a wing on this side and a wing on this side, and then kind of that straight up and down middle. Basically, it would look like a cross. The heights of the ceilings of the cathedral will speak to the grandeur of God. There would be paintings on the roof and on the sides and statues, all pointing to the nature and beauty of God. Even the way they're designed, they were designed to make sound flow through it, so that, one, because at the time they didn't have amplification that we have, so that you have to speak, and they want to speak for the whole church to hear. But also when they sang, they're often beautiful, beautiful rooms to sing in. We're kind of used to the buildings that we gather in, an auditorium, or essentially a box. There's a stage and there's some lights, but they were basically in these churches, they're surrounded. They're sensory engaged to the nature and beauty of his story, which is actually kind of cool when we think about that a lot of these people at that time would have been illiterate. So they wouldn't be able to read their Bible. So they would hear what's being spoken when the priest would preach, or when he would share scripture, or the songs that they would sing that would tell you so much about theology. But then when they look around, they would be visually stimulated. It would be all over the place. It's kind of a neat idea. In our modern context, again, we do use sound and music, and we have visuals. Sometimes there's a visual that's in behind the words that we're singing together, or much like when we're talking, there's a picture or something that brings some sort of thought together of what we're talking about. But then there's also gatherings that are called multisensory worship. And that's basically kind of what they will do. They will sing together, but there'll be other songs that are more about listening to. There'll be instrumentals. There'll be story-driven songs. There'll be artists sometimes to the side or on stage, and in the midst of the song, they're creating some kind of painting. They use story and poetry and art. All these things to stimulate senses. Several years ago, I actually got to go to one of these kind of gatherings, and the whole point of the morning was about Jesus being the bread of life. So there's songs, and there was the pastor speaking, but what they had done is they had baked bread. So the room was filled with this beautiful smell of freshly baked bread. It was really good. And then the bread we sat at tables, and the bread was like in front of you. You could see it. You could smell it. He's talking about it. It's kind of like sensory torture almost at that point. But by the end, what we got to do was, we got to touch the loaf of bread, and we got to eat the loaf of bread. And it was just a cool experience of the idea of Jesus as the bread of life, and how he's satisfying, how he fills. It was a great, great experience. So if this is your pathway, this sensate, I would say go experience some artwork. Go statues that have a Christian message. What is the artist trying to say about the nature of God? Listen to music, many different styles, instrumentals, classical music. Enjoy the resonance. Go enjoy enactments, plays, movies. The Lumo Project might be something great for you. You could find that on YouTube, and there's that narration, but there's also the visual of what's going on, and as well as background noise, and it stimulates you. Also, you might really enjoy a dramatized audio Bible, to hear the inflection of the actors, different actors playing different parts, but just to hear how they speak, and again, hearing music as it goes along and background noises, just to kind of fill in those gaps. Now, there are a few traps we need to be aware of. It's really important. And they're all very, very closely related. One, worshiping the worship. It's easy to do this. It is an experience to be enjoyed. But sometimes we can just chase after the experience, desire that high of the experience, the amazing feelings of the experience, and it really becomes more about enjoying the worship more than who it's supposed to point to. There's a fine line here. There are those who actually will feel sensory worship or this experiential worship is immature or inferior. I want to say this. I do not think I would ever want to use the word immature or inferior, because there's something great and amazing that can happen in that. But to be honest, it can be misleading. But there are many that this leads to a deeper connection and understanding of who God is and his nature. And I love what Gary Thomas writes to help us with this one, is that he writes this: remember, sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell are God's gifts more than they are Satan's temptation. So we don't want to worship the worship. We can also worship without conviction. Kind of the same idea. It's beautiful. We kind of just get caught up in the moment. There's no depth, really. You're not meeting and being transformed by the nature of who God is. It's stimulating our our senses, and we can sing the songs of speaking of great commitment, but there's no actual commitment happening. There's no transformation. You're just caught up in maybe the beauty of this sensory experience. So you don't want to worship without conviction. And finally, you don't want to idolize beauty. Gary Thomas writes this: when God's servants, mere angels, appear to the people in the Bible, even mature prophets were tempted to worship them. Things of great beauty can steal our hearts from the only one worthy of true, unadulterated worship. We can appreciate creation and art, but we do not want it to become an idol. We do not want to be satisfied by the experience. We want to be satisfied by God. Who is it pointing to? And there are unfortunately lots of traditions that have fallen into icon worship. And we can use art, we can use these stimulations, and they can be the object of our worship. So it's a trap we want to avoid. Again, they could be such powerful ways to connect, but we need to mind the trap. So that's it, listen to some good music that paints a picture of who he is, his nature. Music that helps you visualize. Watch the Lumo Project. Be stimulated by the visual element of the Bible being read. Again, dramatization Bible might be something. There's something about different actors speaking different roles that puts us in the moment. What we're going to do right now is we're going to have a moment of using our senses. We're kind of limited. We can use sight and sound. I mean, you can reach out and touch your TV screen or computer monitor or phone. Probably not going to really help you in this moment, but whatever, if that helps. But we are going to use our sense of sight and sound. We're going to listen to a song by Need to Breathe called Who Am I? And just for about a minute. And as that's going on, there's going to be some paintings. One called The Return of the Prodigal Son, which is a Rembrandt painting. Another one called The Forgiven, and the other one called The Hand of God. Let the music flow. Listen to those words. And just look at the pictures as they're presented. So we'll go ahead and do that now.
White lies and desperation, hard times and conversations. No one should ever love me like you do. Sometimes my bad decisions define my false suspicions. No one should ever love me like you do. While I'm on this road, you take my hand. Somehow you really love who I really am. I push you away, still you won't let go. You grow your roses on my barren soul. Who am I, who am I, to be loved by you? Who am I, who am I, who am I, to be loved by you? Who am I, who am I, who am I, to be loved by you? Who am I, who am I, who am I?
Now we're going to move on to the intellectuals. So if you like books, I don't mean like fiction books necessarily, I mean textbooks. If you went to school and you were excited about the textbooks, the thought of reading them excited you. You wanted more textbooks. You were disappointed when there weren't more textbooks. You might find yourself in this pathway. So the intellectual, they want to focus on concepts and truth. So if the sensates, they want to be stimulated by their senses, the intellectuals want to be stimulated by their minds. The sensates say, let me experience. The intellectuals say, let me think. This is really important to note. This pathway is not about your intelligence or IQ. You can be extremely smart and not have this being one of your top pathways. This is the idea we want the person who connects to God by focusing on concepts, truths, and wrestling those, and the stimulation that brings you. It brings you closer to God. Uninterrupted study, books, podcasts, courses, that endless void of YouTube and all the stuff you can probably find on there. You feel closer to God with when new concepts are understood and new insights are gained. Being intellectual, this might excite you. When Jesus says in Mark 12, verse 30 this, love the Lord your God with all your heart. Makes sense, right? With all your soul. Well, love with soul, that's me. With all your mind. Hold on now. Mind. And with all your strength. That's right. With all your mind. You can love with your mind. It's not exactly when we think how I can love someone. I can love someone with my mind. So essentially what that means is I can take a concept and I can just roll it around and let it interact with a few other thoughts I'm having and connect it with some teachings that I've also read in the Bible here, and to maybe give it more clarification. Find a commentary or a book of what someone else has written and see what they're saying that maybe adds more context to the cultural meaning behind things or a linguistic understanding, and then even just be able to ask God as I've got this whole thing going around, give me some insight into this. Psalms will say we need to meditate on things, and the idea of that meditate is the word chew. Just chew on it, let it roll around. Really important when it comes to the intellectual pathway. It's not merely about facts, logic, and information. My grandma, she tells a story about my dad. My dad is definitely the intellectual pathway. She would tell a story about my dad when he was quite young, and he would take things apart like the clock. Take it apart, put it back together again. Often with a few extra pieces left out. And sometimes she said they didn't really work the same again. Well, why was he doing that? He wanted to understand how it works. See, the intellectual, it's not just about finding information, it's about understanding. They want engagement of the mind. Worship really is going to take off for anyone who's an intellectual when their mind is engaged. Challenging verses, let me study it. Let me engage it. Let me dissect it. Let me reconstruct it. It's about understanding. And understanding that leads to transformation. I think there's a verse that really stands out well for this pathway. It's Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. So it's about understanding that leads to transformation. It's a transformation that leads us, how are we supposed to live? How then shall we live? How does God want us to live? How do we live responsibly in light of, fill in the blank? How do we live with this? How do we interact with this? How do we live in God's will? Man, it's interacting with the questions that we've talked a lot about over the last year or so. Remember the gospel fluency questions? Who is God? What has he done that shows us who he is? Who am I, or who are we in light of that? And then, how shall we live? Yeah, who is God? That is a theological question. Who is, what has he done that shows us who he is? Again, theology. That's even moving into Christology. Who am I, or who are we in light of that? That children of God, or we are, who we are as the church. That's ecclesiology. And how do we want to live? Well, that's missiology. all of that pointing to what we want to do, this transformation that comes with understanding of how we want to live. It starts with, who is God? Proverbs 1, starting in verse 5, says this: let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. For understanding proverbs and parables, the sayings and the riddles of the wise, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction. So discernment, guidance, understanding, these are all the goal when it comes to the intellectual pathway. Understanding who God is. It's like if the enthusiast, they kind of love the mystery of God, the intellectual wants to figure that puppy out, right? They want to figure out God. Let me figure this out. Let me get my hands in that. Let me think about that. And don't think that they're not fooled, that God is ultimately completely unknowable, but they're going to figure out everything they can know. And the pursuit of that draws them closer to God, right? They're Sherlock Holmes, right? It's Hercule Poirot. It's, I want to discover, it's Indiana Jones. It's Batman. I'm Batman. It's Velma from Scooby-Doo. I'm going to stop now. Magnum PI, if you like the Hawaiian shirts. Anyway, I'll move along. All right. Things that can help us with our disciplines to really nurture this pathway. Reading the Bible in a year. It's a great thing. Genesis to Revelation. Or better, well, maybe not better yet, but another thing to do is follow a chronological format. That might be very happy. To read the Bible in narrative, to see the overarching message that starts in the beginning and is continuing to the end, what it all points to. Read or watch, the Bible Project videos. Dive into a book of the Bible and just tear it apart, grab a commentary about it. To learn the context and then even read it in different translations to grow your understanding. Read about translations and discover why certain translations are the way they are. Study systematic theology. Who is God? And you study systematically how through the Bible they develop characteristics of who he is. That paints a picture, again, of who is God, who is Jesus, who is the church. What is that supposed to be? Study that. You could also look into ethics. How should we live based on what the Bible's teaching us? Why is it a good way to live? What's the benefit of it? What is the model that we can learn from how Jesus lived? Again, it's important. It's about transformation. What does transformation look like in this era, in this time, as we live in this community, as we live on mission? What is the way to do it? Ethics is a great way to study, a great thing to study. Read books from thinkers from past and present that help and challenge. Know why we believe and see things from different angles, challenging how we've read the Bible and interpret it. One author I actually quite enjoy in this whole thing is Alan Hirsch, and he has a wonderful way of framing and reframing things that bring out new contexts and deeper understandings. And I honestly just can't get enough of reading his work. I am an intellectual. If you haven't figured out, that's one of my pathways. One of the things I did, and just to understand an interesting way to feel closer to God, was I was reading a book several years ago. I remember getting a lot out of this book, and it was good. And then it sort of, it would point to different scriptures to help make the point he was making. And I remember reading in particular a couple scriptures that I didn't really see how it was working with what he was saying. What he was saying was good, but I just didn't see how the scripture worked. And so then I, went to the Bible. I started reading it in full context, and it's like, that doesn't make any sense. And then bringing in commentaries and all that sort of stuff. And at the end, it was like, I think his point ultimately was helpful. But when he tried to connect it to what the Bible was saying, what Jesus was teaching, it was like, that's not what he says here at all. And that wasn't merely just me
hey, I proved some, I proved some guy wrong or something like that. It was more, I actually connected with Jesus in that. And that it was a discovery process, and it was enjoyable, and I connected. Apologetics, it's a great way to get into. Like, listen to some podcasts, watch debates, books upon, the reason and logic for the existence of God, how Christian belief is good and even helpful. Defending the faith in the midst of unbelief, defending Christian doctrines in the face of wrong thoughts and teachings and heresy. I encourage you to read books, listen to sermons from Mark Clark, read some stuff from Tim Keller, Ravi Zacharias. All of that can be super, super helpful. Again, there are some traps you want to avoid. Trap number 1, ready? Loving controversy. People have thoughts, they have experiences, and maybe we can enjoy correcting people just a little too much. Now, we do need to teach. And there are times, you need to argue. There are times, but it's a fine line. Arguing and correcting can totally be devoid of love. It's important that we remember it's not about winning. It's about the welfare and care of the other person. Love and grace is the mark of a Christian, not prideful displays of knowledge. Another thing is this, knowing rather than doing. That could be a huge pitfall. Knowing the right thing becomes somehow a substitute for doing what is right. A wise person applies what they know. Right thinking is very important, but it can't stop there. And sometimes knowledge can be deceptive. In that, like, hey, I know the right thing. I know the right answer. But we still want to walk it out. We still want to live it out. Got to remember, the idea of the intellectual, this pathway, is understanding that leads to transformation. That transformation needs to be evidenced by action. So it's not just my understanding is right, therefore that's good enough. My understanding leads to transformation. That's really important. The last one is being proud, arrogant. If you think your intelligence somehow makes you superior, that's not good. In fact, Paul would write, he said sometimes when knowledge makes us feel important or it puffs up, that's not good. It's love that strengthens the church. Correcting people with sharpness or a condescending attitude, that's not the way we want to be. Truthfully, pride is a common issue with those with a keen mind. We can pass judgment on others when we perceive they have intellectual failings. When there's a self-worth based upon our intelligence, it's not good. Humility is so important. If you have a gifted mind, it's to serve others, not exalt yourself. This is so important. It's to serve others, not exalt yourself. Again, those who have this pathway, mind the traps, but allow and make room for times of deep thinking. You're going to get excited when you come to understand something you didn't understand before. So read books, listen to podcasts, things that challenge you, push your thinking, force you to see God from a different vantage point. Be detectives. This will open up avenues of understanding that'll help you connect with God. That brings us to the end of the 9 pathways. We hope that you're going to use these to connect with God, because it's such an important part of the walk of discipleship. We hope that you find time, make time to walk out in these pathways. Always being mindful of the pitfalls. We want to remember that these pathways are all about connecting to Jesus. We do not want these pathways to be the object of our worship. Remember, encourage one another. Value other people's pathways, even if you don't share them. I mean, each pathway connects to an aspect of God that's so valuable. The sensate can speak to the beauty of God and the awe that comes with it. The intellectual can help us grow in the understanding that leads to transformation. We all have a part to play. Each pathway can bring such a unique thing to the community. It'll enrich the community, and it'll enrich our connections with Jesus. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for your desire to connect to us. Lord, thank you for your word. Thank you that our prayer to you is like a sweet aroma. Lord, and thank you that we can discover pathways to help to be connected to you. Because, Lord, we want to be influenced by you. Thank you for helping us learn to be with you so that we can be influenced by you, to become more like you, and to do the things that you did. Thank you, Lord. Amen.
Thank you so much for watching along with us this week. I hope you'll join us again next week for a brand new podcast. And we release those every week on Sunday for your enjoyment, and hopefully you find them helpful as well. If there's something about today's message that you would like to follow up on with a person, you can type the word NEXT to the number on the screen, 587-600-1120. And we did talk about missional communities. If that's something you're interested in, do exactly the same thing. Type the word NEXT and text it to the number on the screen. We'll help you get connected to a missional community that's the closest one to your neighborhood. Thanks again for watching today. And if you enjoyed today, please click that like and subscribe button. Have a great week.